Hello, my name is Patty Reed, and I am the Outdoor Recreation Grant Planner at Missouri State Parks. And this is the 2023 Grant Application Workshop for the Land and Water Conservation Program. What is the Land and Water Conservation Fund, or LWCF for short? The LWCF is a grant program that started in 1965 with the passage of the Land and Water Conservation Fund Act. The fund is supported by revenue that is generated by offshore oil and gas drilling leases. The purpose of the act is to assist in preserving, developing, and assuring that all citizens of the U.S., including both present and future generations, have access to outdoor recreation. The Act provides funding for federal land acquisition and development, as well as providing financial assistance to states in planning, acquiring, and developing land and water areas and facilities to be used for outdoor recreation. This program is considered a pass-through grant program. The National Park Service is the federal agency who manages the program. The funding is passed through to each state. Here in Missouri, it is granted to the Department of Natural Resources. At DNR, we subgrant at least a portion of the funding through a competitive grant program. The amount of money that is available to grant each year depends on how much is appropriated by Congress and allocated by the National Park Service. So the nice thing about the LWCF program is that it supports both big recreational areas like national parks and small recreational areas like schools. This map, I know that it's hard to read because of the size, but this shows all the LWCF projects through 2020. You can see the number and distribution of projects throughout the state and how much the program has benefited both rural and urban areas. In the 57 years that LWCF has been around, we have funded over $97 million worth of projects across the state. Every single county in Missouri has at least one LWCF project. We are currently over 1,700 projects throughout the state. So, who can apply for the Land and Water Conservation Fund grant? States and local governments, which means cities and counties, can, public school districts, and public universities. This is different from the recreational trail program is that this program only funds public entities. So how does this funding work? This is a 50-50 matching grant program, which means of the total project costs, the federal government will pay up to 50% and your local match must be at least 50%. In other words, for every dollar spent on the project, 50 cents can be reimbursed by the grant if the costs are eligible and then you are responsible for covering the remaining cost. The matching share portion of your project can be a combination of cash, in-kind labor, or equipment use, or donations from a third-party donor. This is a reimbursable program, which means you have to spend some money up front in order to request a reimbursement. The maximum that you can request per sponsor is $500,000 per project. The minimum amount that can be requested is $25,000. We're not sure how much Missouri's 2023 apportionment will be. We are anticipating that it should be about the same as the 22 apportionment, which was about $4.9 million. So what projects are eligible? In the application guide on page 2 through 4, there is a fairly comprehensive list of the types of eligible projects. They can be categorized in a few ways. First is the acquisition of either land or water for public outdoor recreation. This includes acquiring new parkland for development as a standalone park or new acreage that is adjacent to an existing park that you are expanding. It can also be used to complete multiple purpose projects where one component of the project is outdoor recreation related and the other component is not. A good example is a water reservoir. Grant funding can only be used on the part of the project that is considered outdoor recreation. The second use of LWCF funds is for the development of new facilities and renovating of existing facilities. For example, if you have a park that is 20 to 30 years old and you need to update some of the facilities in the park to meet current accessibility standards, LWCF can help with that. LWCF can also pay for a combination of acquisition and development or renovation. For example, let's say you own or manage an existing park and you have the opportunity to acquire land adjacent to your existing park and you want to build a playground on the new land. LWCF can help you with that. Please be aware, all projects that receive LWCF funding must be maintained in outdoor recreational use in perpetuity, which means it has to stay for outdoor public recreation forever. These are just a few photographs of some of the projects that LWCF has funded. The purpose of this slide is to show you the diversity of projects funded through this program. As you can see, there's a skate park, a large playground, a water park, picnic shelter, and a natural trail. Now here are some more photographs. So you have an example here of a fishing dock. You have a tennis/pickleball court, a campground, a track, and a campsite. So once again, take a look at pages 2 through 4 of the grant application guide to see what projects are eligible for funding. On pages 4 through 5, list things that are not eligible for funding. Before you fill out all the paperwork, look to make sure that you have an eligible project. So how do you apply? The process for applying is fairly simple. But if you feel overwhelmed as you start filling out the paperwork, please call us and we can help with it. The grant management section information is listed here on the screen at the bottom. The first step is to go to our website and download the grant application form and the Open Project Selection Process Packet, which is the instructions for filling out the application. Fill out the application form and save it, print it, and mail it to us. The form cannot be emailed to us. We need 2 hard copies. The grant application packet must be postmarked or received by November 16th, 2022. So if you have any concerns about your application, for example, if you want someone to review your scope of work to make sure the activities are eligible, feel free to submit a draft copy of your application to us by October 19th. It doesn't have to be the whole packet. It can just be the application. We will give you suggestions on how to improve it. If you are asking for a courtesy review, we do accept those by email. Send those to the mspgrants@dnr.mo.gov email address on the screen. Our firewall only allows for files that are 8 megabytes or less per email. It is also helpful if you put requests for LWCF courtesy review in the regarding line. After all the applications have been received, the application packets are sent to the LWCF Internal Advisory Board for scoring. This is a board made up of park and recreational professionals. They will look at your application individually and score it based on the criteria listed on the score sheet at the end of the OPSP packet. The grant application guide explains how many points are allotted to each section. After scoring all the application, the board comes together as a group in January for the norming process where they discuss the individual merits of each application. They may adjust their scores accordingly to a strength or weakness identified by another group member that they may have overlooked. At the end of that meeting, they will submit a list of projects they recommend for funding. The grant management section will submit that list to our division director for his preliminary approval. Once we get his approval, we contact the applicants of the projects that have been preliminarily selected and schedule a pre-approval site inspection to verify that everything in the application is as it was described. We will also conduct our risk assessment at that time to evaluate your capacity of complying with the requirements of the grant. Us contacting you to schedule this pre-approval site inspection and risk assessment sometime in February is your clue that you have made it to the next step in the application process. Once we complete those pre-approval site inspections and risk assessments, we will put together a list of projects recommended for funding to send to our division and department directors for approval. After the projects have been approved, we will prepare draft applications for the National Park Service to be submitted in April. All applicants will be notified of the results of the application review process by the end of June. Projects that are approved by the national parks will be uploaded in grants.gov when the National Park Service opens a grant round, which is usually in July. The notice of award and project agreements will be sent to applicants in late fall to winter time, typically in January or October through January, after we receive the federal award from the National Park Service. At that time, applicants of projects that have been awarded will be invited to attend a mandatory grant administrative workshop where we will discuss oversight and management of the project, as well as long-term stewardship requirements. Applicants will have 2 years to complete the grant once it has been awarded, and you'll find that date on the grant agreement. One thing that is important to remember is that you can't start any type of development activities or acquire any property until you have a signed agreement with DNR. Generally, any costs incurred before a financial assistance agreement has been signed are not eligible. The only exceptions to this rule are the pre-award planning costs, which can represent up to 10% of the total project budget. The LWCF grant will reimburse for some pre-award planning costs. However, if you intend to do this, I would contact our office to discuss what costs you are requesting for reimbursement and make sure that they are eligible. All pre-award planning costs have to be explicitly detailed in your application in order to claim the expenditures. Hopefully everyone was able to download the application and the Open Project Selection Process, or OPSP, which is the application directions. If not, you can download the forms from the Land and Water Conservation Fund website, which the link here is at the bottom of the page. And then the application and the OPSP are circled there. We do recommend that you use Adobe for downloading and completing the application. Several individuals have already contacted us about issues they're having with the form when they tried to fill it out with other programs. So please use Adobe. The free version of Adobe will work to fill out this application. So now let's talk about the application itself. This application looks similar to last year's, but there have been a couple of changes to the application, especially in the environmental section. Please make sure that you are filling out the 2023 LWCF application. We opened this grant round early this year because of the changes in the National Park Service's processes. I now have to submit a draft application to them in April before they will approve the final application to be uploaded into grants.gov, hopefully in July. Make sure that you work on the environmental review process early, because some of the processes can take 30 days to get replies back from the other agencies. A complete application packet will need to be mailed to us by November 16, 2022. In the open project selection process in this manual, in the back, which is Appendix B, is the application guide. And when I talk about page numbers from here on out, I am referring to the page numbers in that application guide, which is the directions for filling out this application. Okay, so let's take a look at the form. The first section of the form, questions 1 through 8, ask you to provide general information about the parties included in the application process. The first 2 questions ask you to provide information about your organization. This should be based on the entity that is applying for the funds. Question 2, note that we are no longer accepting a DUNS number. You will need to provide your 12-character alphanumeric ID from SAN.gov, commonly known as the Unique Entity Identifier, or UEI. If you have not gotten this ID yet, you need to register with SAM.gov to receive one, and this process can take up to about a month, so please register with SAM.gov early. Question 3 asks about the application preparer. This is the person who's preparing the application. It doesn't have to be someone from your agency. For example, it could be your regional planning commission that you are working with who is helping you prepare the application. If we have a question about the application packet or the application itself, we will contact the person in question 3. Question 4 is for the person who will be managing the project, and this is the person we will contact when we have questions about the project. This would be the person who will be overseeing the project for your entity and who will be responsible for the expenditures and reimbursements once you have been awarded a grant. This is also the person who will be asked to attend the mandatory grant administrative workshop if you receive an award. Question 5 through 8 ask about your representatives and regional planning commission. These are people who may be notified when you do receive an award. Question 9 through 11 asks you to provide information about your organization's background and prior performance with the Department of Natural Resources. This section is worth 10 points. Pursuant to 2 CFR 200, we are required to conduct a risk assessment of all applicants to ensure that we are being good stewardship of taxpayer dollars and that we are only awarding grants to entities that have the capacity to manage the project. The answers given in this section provide some information about your organization. If you are selected to move on into the round 2, you will be asked to provide additional information to complete the risk assessment, such as a copy of your most recent audit, accounting policies, and procedures. Make sure to answer these questions based on the organization listed in question 1. So, for example, if the City of Missouri's Parkville Parks and Recreation Department is applying for the grant, then the information in this section would be about them and not about the city, or vice versa. In question 11, please notice that we are asking you to provide performance history information for grants received by DNR as a whole, and not just the LWCF program. Only talk about grants from the last 10 years. Be sure to provide accurate information so that we are able to verify it with our other grant managers. And you should list not only what the grant is, but if you have a grant number for a currently open project, then you would want to make sure that you are including that. But once again, only go back 10 years. Questions 12 through 28 ask you to provide information about the project location and the LWCF boundary. This section is worth 10 points, which will be awarded based on how well you provide the information requested. The purpose of this section is to ensure that the site is suitable for dedication as a park in perpetuity. Question 12 asks you to provide basic location information about the park. What is its name, address, and location? The latitude and longitude coordinates should be taken from the park entrance and should match the coordinates you put on your LWCF boundary maps. And we ask that you please use a decimal degree when putting in latitude and longitude. Question 13 asks you to provide the legal description of the LWCF boundary. You can find a legal description on the deed or deeds to the property. If you are encumbering an area that is less than the entire park, you will need to contact a surveyor to have a legal description prepared. Before you contact a surveyor, please have a discussion with us so that we can make sure you are surveying the correct boundaries and don't have to go back and redo it. Question 14 asks you to indicate if the LWCF boundary is the same as the boundary of the entire park or recreation area. If it is, mark yes and move to the next question. If it is not, explain and ensure that this is depicted on the LWCF boundary map. For example, one reason your boundary map may not match the park boundary is if there is a non-outdoor recreation related resource within the park, such as a community center, a cell tower, water tower, or fire station, which is what you want to exclude. If you are a city or if you are a school district that will be creating a school park, I would ask that you contact us so we can help you with your boundary map, because you will not need to encumber the entire school property, just an area of the playground plus access to a parking lot and to the public road. Question 15, ask if the park is already an LWCF protected park. The LWCF program has been in existence since 1965. So we have a large inventory of parks that are already protected under this law. If you do not know if your park is already protected, you can email mspgrants@dnr.mo.gov for information. This question also asks you to identify the acreage of the park. The park acreage that you enter here should match exactly the acreage on your LWCF boundary map. Question 16, ask if you will be creating a new park or recreational area where none previously existed. If your project will create a new park, please explain what the property is currently used for and why it was chosen for use as a park. Question 17, ask if this is an existing LWCF site. And if so, has the site name changed since the last grant? As you know, this program is 55 years old. And so the park name could have very well changed in that time. To help us identify any prior LWCF obligations, please provide a list of the park's prior names and why the name was changed. Question 18, ask if the project is located in a floodplain. To determine if your project is in a floodplain or special flood hazard area, use the FEMA Flood Maps Service Center. There is a link in the grant application instructions on page 21, or the link is located here on the slide. If you determine your project is within a floodplain or special floodplain area, you must obtain a floodplain development permit from your local floodplain authority. For a list of communities and counties participating in the NFIP, use the link in your guide. In some instances, the community or county may require a no-rise certification before a permit is issued. So please make sure you are contacting your local floodplain permitter. In the space provided, indicate if your project is in a floodplain or special flood hazard area and submit a copy of the floodplain map for your project area. If a permit is required and it is already obtained, state the name of the permit and attach a copy to the application. List the commitments required by the permit, or if the permit is not in hand, include a commitment to obtain the permit prior to construction and to follow the conditions of the permit. If floodplain insurance is required, please provide proof of that insurance. So here's an example of what the floodplain map should look like. Note, I have marked the area of effect for this project. Since this is a large park, I have only included the areas I will be affecting. If the park is smaller, you might be affecting the entire park, so you would want to include the entire park in your area. Make sure to include staging area for construction contractors. If you are unsure what area you will be affecting, you should draw your area of effect to be the entire park. Larger area is better than having a smaller area. Question 19, ask if your site is continuous with or connected to any federally owned recreational area. If it is, please provide the name of the recreational area and the name of the land managing agency. Question 20, ask if your site is part of a larger land management area, such as a greenway or regional recreational area. If it is part of a larger management area, explain its relationship to the area. For example, is it owned by the same agency? Does it share a master plan? Do the same people manage the property? Question 21 asks you to describe the existing conditions of the site, including the size of the project area. Provide a written description of the current site and describe any unsafe or hazardous conditions within the park. To help illustrate where the project will be located, include photographs. For example, if the project is the replacement of an existing playground to improve accessibility, you could describe the site, what it currently looks like, the age and condition of the existing equipment, and include photographs of the existing equipment to show that it is old and deteriorated and not accessible. You could show photographs of the playground surfacing that you plan to replace, photographs showing the accessible route or lack thereof from the accessible parking lot to the play area. Question 22 asks you to explain why the site is suitable for the type of outdoor recreation proposals being submitted. For example, it is already an active park and you are adding new amenities that will enhance the park's use. Question 3 asks if the site included any elements that physically detract from the outdoor recreational experience or that present a potential public safety hazard. Please explain any concerns you have and whether the project will address these concerns. So, for example, does the project area have overhead utilities? Will those utilities be placed underground as part of the project? And I will just let you know this, that when it comes to overhead utilities, if you are going to be touching the electrical in this project, you are expected to bury those. It is a requirement within an LWCF park that overhead utilities be buried whenever possible. But you don't have to do it until you're actually planning to touch the electrical. But once the electrical is touched at any time after the project, you would be expected to bury them. So now's a good time to do that because that is an eligible cost associated with LWCF funding. Question 24 asks you to provide the name of the property owner as it is stated on the deed. If there are multiple parcels associated with a project that is located within the LWCF boundary area, please provide information for each parcel along with a copy of the deed or deeds. 25 asks you to explain what is or will be the applicant's type of ownership or control of the property. From the list provided, indicate if the project sponsor owns the property fee simple, less than fee simple, or if the property is being leased from another government agency. If the ownership is less than fee simple, explain what rights the applicant has and what agency holds the underlying fee simple ownership. If the property is being leased, does the lease include approval requirements related to recording the recreational use deed restriction? The landowner must be an eligible applicant, such as a government agency or school district, and the lease agreement must be at least for 25 years to qualify for an LWCF grant funds. And it's very important that whoever owns the land understands that at the end of the project, there will be a deed restriction placed on all the deeds to the property, explaining that this is now protected under the LWCF Act in perpetuity. 26 asks you to list all present, existing, and reasonably anticipated liens or mortgages or both on the property and the effect of the declaration of dedication to outdoor recreation use that will be required. Identify outstanding mortgages, loans, etc., amount still owned, and describe how this will affect the current project. If a loan will be required to complete this project, please include how much you anticipate borrowing and for what duration. Remember that this is a reimbursable grant. You do have to have startup cash in order to get this project moving forward and because you have to pay first and then we reimburse. So please keep that in mind. Question 27 asks if there are any right-of-way easements or reversionary interests associated with the property. Because the property located within the LWCF boundary will be dedicated to public outdoor recreation use in perpetuity, it is important to identify any parties who may have a superior interest. Please list all right-of-ways, easements, or reversionary interests associated with the site. Make sure to clearly mark the easements on your LWCF boundary map. If the project is selected to move on to round 2, you will be asked to provide copies of all these documents. Question 28 asks you to identify how you determine if there were any right-of-ways, easements, or reversionary interest. Project sponsors are required to do one of these two things. They must either conduct a title search to identify these interests, which is the preferred method, or you do research the property themselves by contacting the county recorder of deeds and the city as indicated on the form. Please clarify that a search was conducted on the property in one of these two ways indicated on the application form. I also want to point out that the federal LWCF program does not allow us to reimburse or use as match any costs associated with appraisals or other incidental land costs, acquisition costs, such as title search, recording fees, and that sort of things, even when they are required by the project. Any costs related to these must be borne by the project sponsor. And we do ask that when you do the title search that you please include that in the supporting documents. The next series of questions, question 29 through 33, pertain to property management and stewardship and are worth 10 points. This section asks project sponsors to provide information about how the property will be managed for the long haul. Question 29 asks who will manage and operate the site. For example, you would put Missouriville Park and Recreation Department, or if it's the city, put the city down. I would get very specific to say exactly which department will be managing and operating the site. Question 30 asks you if this is a multiple use site. Indicate if this site serves more than one purpose. So for example, if it's also a school, a reservoir, or a state wildlife area, those are multiple use sites. If the site does serve multiple purposes, explain how often the public will have access to the proposed recreational area. Explain any kind of restrictions to allow public outdoor recreation that will occur. For example, a school may only allow public access when the school is not in session, so they should include the school community agreement within the supporting docs. There is a template for this school agreement located on page 17 of the application guide. You also want to make sure that you are including the hours that the public will have access within this school agreement. So you could say during school, the public will have access from 4 o'clock until sunset. When school is not in session, the school park is now open from sunrise to sunset. During summer school, whatever your hours of summer school are, then the public wouldn't be allowed access, but afterwards they would be. So please make sure you include that as part of your supporting documents. Question 31, ask if there are any pre-existing or planned indoor facilities on the site that would not themselves be eligible for LWCF grant funding. So LWCF assistance will not be provided for support facilities or portions thereof that contribute primarily to public indoor activities, such as community center, meeting rooms, auditoriums, libraries, study areas, restaurant, lodges, motels, luxury cabins, your furnishings, food preparation equipment, kitchen and equipment sale areas. So those are, you can't include within the boundary. So you would need to make sure that those are properly noted on the boundary map. Now, things like bathhouses, public restrooms, maintenance sheds are potentially eligible for LWCF assistance since their basic function is to provide support for outdoor recreational facilities. If one of these facilities already exists or is planned in the space or is planned in the space below the question, please describe and explain how, if the structure support public outdoor recreation. Question 32, ask if there are any pre-existing or planned resource management practices occurring within the LWCF boundary, such as timber management or grazing, and if there are, describe the nature of the practice, the anticipated duration, and how the practice supports outdoor recreation. Question 33, ask if there are any pre-existing or planned uses of the site that are incompatible with the LWCF requirements and should be excluded from the LWCF boundary. If there are, please describe the nature of the use and ensure it is clearly depicted on the proposed LWCF map. For example, an example would be if a cell tower, water tower, community center already exists within the park, you would want to clearly mark those on your map, label them, and take that square footage out of the acreage of your park. You would also want to clarify here the future intent of that area if it's going to become subject to the LWCF requirement once the use is terminated. So if, for instance, you tear down your water tower because you put it someplace else, will that land now become part of the park, or are you going to be building another water tower there? Question 34 asks you to provide a detailed post-completion plan on how the project will be managed and maintained in perpetuity. Project sponsors should demonstrate significant funding and labor to maintain public access to the project in perpetuity. Additionally, sponsors should indicate their post-completion plan for ensuring user safety and project sustainability for the life of the project and describe how routine maintenance of the project will be accomplished after project completion. Include who will perform the maintenance and necessary repairs and how often maintenance inspections will occur. So if you already have a maintenance schedule for your parks, I recommend that you put that down here and tell if this is an existing park, how often is it already mowed? How often do you do inspections in it? And make sure that we are aware that this schedule will continue in perpetuity. The next section of the application, questions 35 through 53, pertain to the applicants who are acquiring real property, whether by donation, purchase, or lease. Please note that this section combined with the following section on project development have a combined value of 20 points. The reason we combine these sections is because not all projects will include both acquisition and development. So we wanted to make sure that they are scored fairly. The acquisition section asks project sponsors to provide information about the property that is being acquired as part of the project. If project is being acquired, and this means either you're purchasing it, someone's donating it to you, or you're going to lease it, this section must be completed. If you are not acquiring property as part of the project, you can complete question 35 with a no and then skip to the next question. If you are acquiring property as part of your application, we recommend that you contact us before you start the process of acquiring the property because you must comply with the Uniform Relocation Assistance and Real Property Acquisition Policy for Federal and Federally Assisted Program Act of 1970 as amended, commonly known as the Uniform Act. The Uniform Act also applies to acquiring property with non-federal funds when the intent is to apply for LWCF money for future development. In other words, a project sponsor can't knowingly circumvent the federal law by acquiring real property with local funds or through donations and not follow the regulations of this act, and then apply for LWCF grant at a later date for project development. Question 35 asks if you will be acquiring real property as part of the project. Include both purchase, donation, and or lease. Question 36 asks why is acquisition necessary? This is where you would explain the purpose for acquiring property as part of the project, such as creating a new park in the city. Question 37 asks you to describe the existing resources or features of the site and that make it desirable for public outdoor recreation. What existing resources and features made you choose this site? Question 38 asks you to explain how you envision this acquisition contributing to outdoor recreation in the long term. Question 39 through 41 ask about the parcel or parcels to be acquired. What is the name? What is the size and acreage? And what is the value of land? The value of the land should be based on an appraisal that meets the Uniform Appraisal Standards for Federal Land Acquisition and Title 49 CFR Part 24, also known as a Yellow Book appraisal. That was conducted by a certified general appraiser, and a technical review of the appraisal has been performed by a qualified review appraiser. The appraisal should be less than 6 months old. If the property is valued at less than $10,000, a waiver evaluation can be completed by a qualified professional and used in lieu of an appraisal. Please include a copy of the appraisal and review appraisal and or the waiver evaluation with this application. Remember that in order to use an LWCF grant on new acquired property, the land acquisition must comply with the Uniform Act. The cost of all appraisal, review appraisal, waiver evaluations, and incidental real estate expenses are not eligible costs for either reimbursement or match in the LWCF program and must be borne solely by the project sponsor. So the only value that you can use as match or with the grant is the value of the parcel based off of the Yellow Book appraisal. Question 42 asks you to indicate what is your anticipated acquisition date. You can include a year from when the award is done, or if you know it will happen within 2 months, you can actually put a specific date down. Question 43 asks you to confirm which statement is true. So, did a state certified review appraisal has reviewed the appraisal and has determined that it was prepared in conformity with the uniform appraisal standards for federal and land acquisition, or a qualified professional has prepared a waiver valuation for this property in conformity with 49 CFR 24.102 CD2. So make sure you check mark which one it conforms with. Question 44 asks you to indicate who the property is being purchased from. What is the name of the seller or the donor? Include their letter of intent to sell, donate, or lease the property. Question 45 asks if there are any buildings or structures being purchased along with the property. If there are, please describe what is planned for these structures and whether the grant fund project includes the value of these structures. Question 46 asks you to explain how the site will be made open and accessible for public outdoor recreation use. Describe your plans, including any planned signage, entrances, parking, site improvements, and other allowable activities. So make sure you're giving us plenty of detail here. Question 47 asks when the park will be open for public outdoor recreation use. Please provide an anticipated date for when the site will be made open and available for public outdoor recreation use. So, for example, you could say within 2 years of the notice of grant award, or you could say January of 2024. 48 asks you to describe the development that is planned for the site for 3 years following acquisition. This information will be used to ensure compliance with the National Historic Preservation Act and National Environmental Policy Act, as such should focus on what you reasonably expect to accomplish within the next 3 years. Not a master plan that will take 10 years or more to accomplish. So just talk about what you will be accomplishing in the next 3 years. Question 49 is for projects that include only acquisition. So if only you're going to be acquiring the land and doing nothing else but keeping it as passive parkland, you will need to answer this question. It asks if the development will be delayed by more than 3 years from the grant close. Explain why this acquisition is still a priority for grant funding at this time and what ability will the public have to use the site in the interim. If development will not be delayed for more than 3 years from the grant close, indicate when development will be completed. So it is a requirement of the LWCF grant that when you are acquiring property, that it must be developed within 3 years of receiving grant funds. So if you are getting your grant funds and immediately doing development, that is good. But if you're just acquiring the property with the grant fund, then when do you plan on starting the development of it? Will it be in the next 3 years? If it's not, this is the question you have to explain why it's not going to be, and why that it's still a priority to purchase the property at this time. Question 50 asks if this acquisition is an addition to an existing park or other recreational area. If it is connected to another park or recreation, explain how it will support or enhance the existing park. Question 55. Ask if the property is being acquired under threat of condemnation. If it is, please explain. Question 52. Ask if the property was listed for public sale. If it was, explain how the property owner was made aware of the grant sponsor's interest in the property. Include the letter within your supporting documentation. Question 53. Ask if the project will involve donated property. If it will, include evidence that the seller was offered the fair market value of the property as just compensation and willingly chose or is choosing to donate the property instead. So you would want to include all these letters within the supporting documents. One letter would be stating that they do have the right to just compensation. They have the right to be with the appraiser when the appraisal is done, and that they understand what was offered. And then they would write a letter saying that they would like to donate the property, and all that would be included. The next section is the project development question. Question 54 through 59 is where you will describe what is being constructed or developed as part of the project and detail your scope of work. Question 54 asks you to assign your project a name. Provide a short name and include the current phase if it is being constructed in phases. For example, Memorial Park Aquatic Development Phase 1. The project name will be how the project is referred to on all the project agreement, project budget, reimbursement requests, quarterly reports, and inspection reports. Question 55 asks what new facilities will be constructed as part of the project. Only discuss new facilities that are being added into the project area. So, for example, if there is currently no restroom at this park, then adding a restroom is a new facility and would be discussed here. If you say an old playground is being removed and a new playground is constructed, this is not a new facility and should not be included in this question, and we'll actually go into the next question. Another example is new parkland being purchased. Then everything that you are putting in this park is new facilities and new development. So everything for a new park would be listed here. Question 56 asks what existing facilities will be renovated or replaced as part of the project. So you want to be specific about which ones. Indicate when the facility was initially constructed and when it was last renovated. So if the project was constructed or renovated using LWCF funds, or originally or in the past, please indicate the year and the project number. The project number will be a 7-digit number beginning with the number 29 dash. And then there will be some numbers afterwards and can be located on the project agreement. So if you're not sure if your project was funded with LWCF in the past, you can contact us and we can help you understand what was constructed with LWCF funding and what was not. But even if it wasn't constructed with LWCF funds, you should include it on here if it's being renovated or if it's being demolished or anything like that. That would all go up here. Question 27 asks you to describe what general site improvements will take place as part of the project. This includes any demolition, site preparation, landscaping, habitat improvement, utilities, or other site improvements. Include the depth that the utilities will be buried, if soil is being added to the site, where that soil is coming from, and if soil is being removed, where will you be depositing it? Is it staying within the park or are you taking it off site to another park? So please be very specific here about what your preparations are for your general site improvements. Question 58 asks you to tell us what is anticipated lifespan of the facilities that will be funded as part of the project. We know that facilities will not last forever. Give an estimate of how long the facility will last with regular maintenance. Project sponsors are required to maintain the facilities for their useful life and the park in perpetuity. So, like I said, we all understand nothing lasts forever. Generally, playgrounds, have a certain number of years that they are considered good and stuff like that. So you would want to include that here as well. And if you're developing maybe a pool can last, between 40 and 50 years with good maintenance. Make sure that's what we're asking for here. Question 59 is where you provide your detailed project narrative or your scope of work. In this section of the application, you should provide a clear and concise description of your project. This means that I should be able to read this section and know exactly what will be performed under the scope of this project and understand how it fits into a large efforts associated with the park. For example, if this is phase 1 of a larger project, you would want to list that first, and then at the very end you could talk about the overall plan. So when you're writing your scope of work, tell what is being completed in the first phase, and then tell us what will be completed in the other. So make sure that's at the bottom. Also include who will be performing the work. Is it a contractor or in-house labor? Is your project shovel ready? In other words, if the project were funded today, would you be able to proceed as soon as you receive your notice to proceed? When I look at this section, I should be able to see that you have a project that is eligible for LWCF funding, exactly what the scope of work will entail, and know that it can reasonably be completed in 2 years. So everything that you've listed in the above paragraphs, above questions, you would want to make sure now you're giving us the details for it. So here is an example of a good scope of work. It says the project is the renovation of the existing playground. City employees will remove all the playground equipment and pea gravel. A contractor will be hired to install the playground and sidewalks. The playground area will be graded for the new equipment and expanding from 20,000 square feet to 30,000 square feet. The site grading will remove between 6 to 8 inches of soil to make room for the new playground surfacing. The excess soil will be placed in low areas throughout the park. No trees will be removed as part of this project. The new playground will include universal play structures for ages 2 through 5 and 5 through 12 with ramp entrances, interactive panels, slides, and shade coverings. The 10-person swing set will include ADA swings and parent-child swing. Standalone structures to include an in-ground merry-go-round, musical instruments, net climber, tunnels, ADA double zip line, and interactive panels. The surfacing will consist of 12,000 square feet of bonded rubber surfacing and 10,000 square feet of engineered wood fiber. 6 ADA benches will be installed within the playground with shade coverings. The entire playground will be enclosed with a 5-foot high fencing with 2 ADA gates for entrance and exit. The footings for the play structures will extend between 36 and 48 inches into the ground. An 8-foot wide sidewalk will be poured around the playground and will extend to connect the restroom and parking lot to the playground. The sidewalk will be dug into the ground 6 inches to allow for 2 inches of aggregate and 4 inches of concrete. This project is shovel ready and will begin shortly after receiving the award and will be completed within 2 years. Now, like I said, this is an example of a very good scope of work. It's a very detailed scope of work. But let's say you don't know exactly how much equipment you're going to be able to put in or what kind of equipment you want to put in, then you don't want to go into this much detail, because this scope of work that you are putting in this application will be sent directly to the National Park Service, and this is what you will be expected to complete. So if you don't know the exact size of your playground, don't put it in there, because if you put a size in there, then you're going to have to do that. But try and be as specific as possible, because the more details you can give, the better it is that we can tell what you're actually going to be constructing, and we know that it's actually shovel ready, and the project will move forward. Another thing you want to look at when you're doing the scope of work is, once again, make sure that everything that you have listed here, that you're going to see it later on in the budget narrative. The next section, question 60 and 61, are worth 5 points and ask you to describe the need for this project. This section is for the project sponsor's opportunity to demonstrate to the internal advisory committee the project's merit. This is your time to sell it. So question 60 asks you to describe both the short and long-term outdoor recreation benefits of this project. Include how the project is beneficial and who it benefits. There are 2 really big questions that need to be addressed here. One is, how is this project beneficial, and what will it provide for users? Ask yourself these questions. Is there a targeted group that will most benefit by this project? Does it fill the need for an underserved segment of the population? Describe the degree to which the project will improve outdoor recreational opportunities for underserved populations. Priority will be given to projects located where they will serve neighborhoods with significant population of underserved groups that are lacking in recreational opportunities. These underserved groups include the elderly, minority population, low-income households, and those with physical or mental challenges. To determine if the project area contains higher than average concentration of these populations when compared to the rest of the community or county in which the project is located, see the link in the grant administrative guide. You could use the U.S. Census Quick Fact Finder to help you locate this information. Give us the number of people that you estimate will benefit from this project. The second question to answer is, will this project be meeting a need that is currently unmet in the community, or will it be addressing a recreation deficiency? Indicate how and describe whether the project will be improving the quality of outdoor recreational experiences in the community or region by creating a new park, outdoor recreational area, or significantly enhancing the quality of the existing park / outdoor recreational area by upgrading the infrastructure. Priority will be given to projects located in areas where existing park / outdoor recreational areas are not of a comparable caliber to parks and recreational areas otherwise elsewhere in the community or region, or whose park / recreation area are otherwise inadequate to serve community needs. Also indicate if no other like recreation facilities or activities exist within the community or jurisdiction. Describe how this project will introduce a new facility or recreational activities. An example would be that your project is like creating a universal playground, or you're rehabbing a swimming pool and it happens to be the only one in a 30-mile radius. Question 61 asks you to choose the category that best describes the service area for this project. Whether it will serve a single neighborhood or multiple neighborhoods, or will you serve an entire community or multiple communities in a region? If the project will serve multiple neighborhoods and communities, indicate how. Is this project within walking distance of expected users, or will it provide connectivity to other recreational area or residential or business areas? Indicate if this project is within a half-mile or a 10-minute walk from a nearby neighborhood, or within a mile if it's serving multiple neighborhoods or an entire community. So if this project sits in a neighborhood, tell us how many people are in that neighborhood that could walk to this park. If it's close to downtown, how many businesses are downtown that can now walk to this park? You should indicate if the project will connect or provide connectivity to other parks or recreational areas, to your schools, to your business district, etc. Priority will be given to projects that are easily accessible by their intended users. The next series of questions, questions 62 through 66, pertain to project planning and ask the sponsors to demonstrate that the project is well planned and feasible project. This section is worth 10 points. Question 62 asks you to describe how this project aligns with the statewide comprehensive outdoor recreational plan, commonly known as the SCORP. The SCORP is a 5-year planning document that identifies outdoor recreation issues of statewide significance and evaluates the supply of and demand for outdoor recreation resources and facilities in Missouri. The SCORP provides unified guidance to state and municipal agencies as they develop and expand outdoor recreational opportunities for their respective constituents and jurisdiction. Priority will be given to projects that provide opportunity for program and activities identified in the SCORP, such as opportunities for bicycling, camping, walking, running, jogging, gardening, dog walking, wildlife viewing, fishing, family gathering, and youth-related activities. Project proposals to develop facilities listed as priorities in the SCORP will also be given more weight. So my hint to you is that the goals and priorities start on page 73 of the SCORP, and you should identify by the number what priority and goal you are going to be meeting, and then explain how this project fits into that goal. Question 63 asks if the project is identified in a local, school, regional, county, and or park comprehensive plan, master plan, or special study. Project sponsors are strongly encouraged to develop project applications that meet high priority needs of the indicated clientele. Project proposals addressing needs at regional and local levels will be given priority points. The project sponsor should indicate if the proposed project is included in a regional or local recreational master plan, capital improvement plan, or other land use management plans. If it has been, provide the name of the plan, the governing body that adopted or approved the plan, and when the plan was approved and adopted. A copy of the relevant portion of the plan, please do not send in the entire plan, must be included with the application. So the 2 or 3 pages that talk about your project should be included in the supporting documents. Project sponsors should also explain how the project fits into other projects planned for the site in the next 3 years. So if this is phase 1, explain what is included in phase 2 here. Now, if there are no plans for this park within the next 3 years after this project is completed, you can just write no plans currently in the next 3 years. If you know that there's something going to happen in 10 years, I still do not want that here. We're only looking at the 3 years after this project is completed. Question 64 asks you to describe the process that led to the development of this proposal and how the public was involved. Project sponsors are strongly encouraged to involve the public when determining project need. Public involvement is a means of building support for the project as well as a method for identifying potential partners. The project sponsor should include the public involvement that led to the selection of the process, such as any public meetings, open houses, surveys, etc. The project sponsor should also summarize any feedback or commentary received from the public that shows support or opposition to the project and indicate the likelihood of use. A copy of your proof of public involvement should be included in this application. And when you had someone who was opposed to your project, we would like to know how you addressed that concern and if they were satisfied with your answer. So you should include that all here too. Question 65 asks what design elements are included that contribute to preserving environmental resources as part of ensuring a quality outdoor recreational experience for future generations. This question is asking project sponsors to describe what steps they will take to avoid and minimize impacts to cultural, historical, and archaeological resources, threatened or endangered species, wetlands or streams, water and air quality, floodplains, farmlands, etc. Other factors to consider include landscaping with native species, preventing the spread of noxious or invasive species, minimizing impacts from hazardous waste sites, and sensitivity to environmental justice issues. Project sponsors should also include any design features that will increase sustainability of the project, such as features that provide erosion control or minimize stormwater runoff, or design elements that are unique, such as the use of recycled materials, developing within a smaller footprint. So are you using less concrete or asphalt? Are you incorporating energy efficiency, such as the use of timers or sensors? Are you installing solar panels? Either like on your benches so that maybe your benches can now also be charging stations, or are you using that on your restrooms to make your restrooms use the solar power? Are you using gray water? Are you collecting rainwater? Are you creating a pollination garden at the end or near where the runoff is going to be? So all those things is what you want to put in here. Now, question 66 asks how accessible requirements under the Americans with Disability Act, ADA, and the Architectural Barrier Act, ABA, are being addressed in this project. For projects using LWCF funding, your project must meet ADA standards. There are links to those standards in the application guide on page 29. In this box, you should explain how you will meet these requirements. The National Park Service asks that we address both how the facility will meet ADA and ABA, but also that there will be accessible routes to each facility and accessible parking. Every element of the project must now have an accessible route to it from the parking lot. So make sure you're including that in your scope of work. The accessible routes and the accessible parking. You can earn more points by demonstrating that you have gone above and beyond the minimal expectations. For example, some communities install universal access playgrounds. If you are planning to have a universal playground, tell us why it is universal. What features did you add to make it universal? How did you go above and beyond the minimum of requirements of ADA and ABA? This is your opportunity to tell us what you are doing to make sure that the broadest number of people can use and benefit from your project. This section gives you the opportunity to tell us about any partnerships you have and what your partners are contributing to the project. This is where you list your third-party match only, not what the sponsors are providing. So for example, if your local Rotary Club is giving you a check for materials, list that here. Or maybe the Boy Scouts are volunteering some labor. That would get listed here too. Perhaps someone is allowing you to use their equipment to complete part of the project. That would be a donation too. Only list partners or donors that are truly contributing in a tangible way. Don't list vendors who are promising to give you a discount on materials. All LWCF projects have to follow state and federal procurement laws. So if a vendor is going to give you materials, then you can list it here. But if they are only promising a discount, that is not considered a donation. The next section of the application, questions 68 through 75, asks the project sponsor to provide information about the project budget, available funding, and funding yet to be secured, and to include an itemized description of budget cost categories. Notice this section is worth 23 points, so it's worth your effort to ensure you answer these questions in detail. This is the section that has the highest point value. So like I said, this is a section you should really concentrate on when you're dealing with your application. So question 68 asks, what assurances can the project sponsor provide that there's adequate funding and manpower to complete the project within 2 years, especially that the sponsor has the upfront cash to begin the project and enough labor to finish the project. The project sponsor should reference supporting documents in the response, such as the financial assurance letter and the donation letters from their donors and partners. For the financial assurance letter in the application guide, there is a template for that financial assurance letter. And then everyone who plans on making a donation should write a letter stating that they do intend to do that if the grant is awarded. Remember, this is a reimbursable grant and you do need startup cash in order to get this project moving. So you need to tell us how much startup cash you already have and so that we understand that this project is ready to move forward. In question 69, ask you to explain how you arrived at the cost estimates for this project. We recommend that you contact like 3 or more vendors to get prices and then take an average for the cost estimate. Also, remember to think about inflation. So, in the past year, prices have gone up. So last year, something may have cost $35 per square yard. Well, this year it may be up to $45. So in a year to year and a half, where's that cost going to be? And you might think about adding a little bit of inflation to your prices. So instead of saying 45, you might say 50, maybe 55. What you do not want to do is go from 45 up to like $100 per square yard, because there is a drastic jump there, and I don't think that you could justify that price increase. So think about inflation when you're doing this budget. You can't include a line item in the budget for that contingency, but you can add additional cost to each item for the contingency. We do not want to see a quote from one vendor submitted with this application. It does make it look like that you've already chosen a contractor, which is why I say do your research, look at 3 or 4 more vendors and take an average. There are federal regulations for procurement that you must follow as a vendor, so a vendor or contractor cannot be pre-chosen for this grant program. If an engineering firm has already designed your project, you can include their cost estimates with this application. Also, when you are working on costs for your budget, you need to think about the new Public Law 11758 and the Executive Order 14005 that were just signed into law within the past year. Both of these, the public law and the executive order, will be included in the federal agreement when you would receive an award if you are recommended for funding. So in section 70914 of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, we have the Public Law 11758, and this is the Build America, Buy America. To summarize the law, it states none of the funds under a federal award that are part of federal financial assistance program for infrastructure may be obligated for a project unless all the iron, steel, manufactured products, and construction materials used in the project are produced in the United States, unless subject to an approved waiver. For this public law, infrastructure is defined at a minimum as the structured facilities and equipment in the United States for roads, highways, and bridges, public transportation, dams, ports, harbors, or other maritime facilities, intercity passenger and freight railroads, freight and intermodal facilities, airports, water systems, which include drinking water and wastewater systems, electrical transmission facilities and systems, utilities that generate, transport, and distribute energy. So if a portion of your project meets that definition of infrastructure per this law, you will need to get cost estimates for products produced in the United States. A copy of our Build America, Buy America certification can be located at the LWC website under related content. I recommend that if you think part of your project is infrastructure, that you take a look at that certificate. There is a lot more information on that certificate about the law and how it all will work. And then you will understand what you need to be asking these vendors when you're trying to get quotes. The second one was Executive Order 14005, entitled Ensuring the Future is Made in All of America by All of American Workers. This executive order states the recipient shall maximize the use of goods, products, and materials produced in and services offered in the United States, and whenever possible, procure goods, products, materials, and services for sources that will help American businesses compete in a strategic industries and help American workers thrive. So once again, when you are looking at the cost of materials and supplies, be sure to keep this public law and executive order in mind. Question 70 asks you to provide assurances that the costs listed are reasonable. According to 2 CFR 200.404, all costs must be reasonable, which means it does not exceed that which would be incurred by a prudent person under the circumstances prevailing at the time the decision made to incur the costs. If your project meets the definition of that infrastructure per Public Law 117.58, then you can say here that the costs are reasonable in order to meet the Build America, Buy America provision. This is also where I was talking about that if, currently it costs 45 and you jump it up to 100, how do you explain that that isn't a reasonable jump? You could explain that it's reasonable to be 55 because of inflations, and you've seen what's happened in the last year. You saw the trend in the last year. And so you're building in the inflation for happening because you're not going to start construction for at least a year, maybe year and a half to two. So that can be reasonably explained. So think about how you're going to explain how it is a reasonable cost. In question 71, ask you to describe any project elements or costs that will improve site resiliency and facility longevity. So if you remember earlier, we asked you what the lifespan of what you were constructing was. Now we want to know if you did anything to help that extend that life. And you could say, for example, you chose to install a concrete sidewalk over compacted rock because it will reduce the cost of maintenance by X dollars per year and has a lifespan of X years. So think about what what you did with your project and what you're doing with your project that will make it last longer. Because remember, you don't have to necessarily keep the facility in perpetuity. You just have to keep it for the lifespan of that facility, but you do have to keep the park in perpetuity. So you're going to be maintaining this park. So what can you do now to help it last longer? Question 72 is the project budget table. Note that there are now only 7 cost categories and all budget items will be in one of these categories. So planning, engineer, environmental review would include costs for hiring an engineer firm to design your project, hiring a firm to do the environmental review section of the application. So this is going to be a pre-award cost. Costs for having a cultural resource survey done, which could also be a pre-award cost. Number 2 is land acquisition. This total should match what is in the appraisal. Okay, so you're getting that total from your appraisal. Site work. In site work, you would include costs for grading, excavating, burying overhead power lines and utilities, and your landscaping. For demos and removal, include costs for demoing old facilities, include the labor. In category 5 is construction. This is all the material, supplies, and labor costs for what you will need to construct your project. Most items will fall under construction. Okay, so everything should be here. Equipment use, number 6, is only to be used for the cost for in-house equipment use that you will use on this project. So if the equipment is being provided by the contractor, it doesn't get broken out here. Equipment use is only for in-house equipment use. And then finally, number 7 is your signage, which will include all types of signs that are being used in this project. When you fill out this table, you don't need to add commas or any types of punctuation. The table will automatically sum itself if you leave those out. The first column is the grant request. This is how much money you are asking for from the grant. The second and third column asks for your match. Those 2 columns equal your match. The project sponsor column is what you, the project sponsor, are contributing, and the donation by third party column is where you document costs you plan to use that have been donated to the projects. So let's say my project is a $100,000 playground project, $85,000 of which is to purchase playground equipment, and $15,000 is donated labor to install. So, as you can see, you will put $50,000 in the federal column under construction, $35,000 in the project sponsor column for construction, and then $15,000 in the donation column for construction. And there's my $100,000. So also notice that the 2 matching share columns total at the bottom. Remember that this is a 50-50 grant, so the total matching share should be at least 50% of the total project cost. if you are submitting a truly 50-50 grant. So remember, it's the total of the donation and the projects has to equal, in my example, 50,000 because I had 50,000 for the grant request. I don't have to have, that totally in the project sponsor if you have match from a donation. Remember that your project will be funded as it is described in your application and in this budget table. So if you are matching at a share greater than 50%, your project will be funded at whatever percent matching share you requested in your application, and any request to increase or decrease project costs will occur proportionate to what you pledged in this application. For your convenience, we have added a percentage of matching share to the bottom right-hand side of the table, which goes out to 2 decimal points, just like the financial assistance agreements do. I do want to make one thing very clear here, is that you will receive no extra points for overmatching on this table. So overmatching does not get you any more points. Your points here are based solely on the quality and accuracy of your numbers. Okay? No extra points for overmatching. Question 73 asks you to tell us more about how you are supporting the project. We want to know what percentage of the project match is immediately available to start the project. Will you be using in-house or force account labor, in-house equipment? Are you simply using general revenue to pay for this project? Do you have donation pledges for those that have not already received yet? You can include a letter showing the pledge. We want to know how much of the match is secure and how much is not. Okay, so if you have to still do additional fundraising, we want to know what percent you still need to raise. So tell us exactly how much money you have your cash up front in order to start this project. And then what portion of the plan of the project is reliant on future fundraising, and do you have an alternative plan for coming up with match if future fundraising efforts are unsuccessful? Remember, you will need upfront cash to start this project. This is a reimbursable grant, and you can only be reimbursed for cash expenses. Cash expenses paid for by the project sponsor is what is reimbursable by the grant funding. Donations of material, service, in-house labor, and equipment can only count as match. So question 74 asks if any pre-award costs are included as part of the project. Only costs associated with the planning, engineering, and environmental review can be used as pre-award costs. If yes, indicate the date from when those costs started being incurred, what the cost was for, the total amount of pre-award costs anticipated to be incurred before the grant start date. Please remember that these costs can only be incurred up to 18 months prior to the date of the project approval. I would use October 23 as an estimated approval date. Additionally, please make sure that these costs are included in the budget table and narrative, which are questions 72 and 75. Now, here is a summary of eligible costs by grant request and project sponsor match. This is not an all-inclusive list. For a more complete list, go to your grant administrative guide, pages 31 through 32. If something isn't listed there, you can always call and ask me. The ones we have listed here are just some of the most common expenses. So for labor, under the grant request, grant funds can be used to contract labor. Remember, though, that contract labor must be competitively bid in accordance with state and federal procurement and prevailing wage laws. Now, some of the your grantees might be using in-house labor or force account labor, and that would only be on the project sponsor's match. Okay, so if you are using your own labor, it should be valued at the person's actual rate of pay. So what they are currently being paid. If you have volunteer labor, it can be valued at $12 per hour unless that person is providing a skilled service. In that case, the rate would be similar to what they are paid to perform that service. And you would be able to document how you came up with that. So you have to document it. So I always say if you have a contractor in town who says, oh, we'll come in and demo your park for you, have them give you an estimate of what that would cost them to do that. And then when you would be awarded and they actually do the work, they'd basically give you a invoice with that cost on there and just write across donation. And they should also provide a letter of support saying that they're planning to donate this when the project is done or is awarded. So the next things we have are materials for development of the recreational facility or your sport facilities. Don't be specific on a brand, be very generic. You're going to go out and you're going to get, it's going to be competitively bid most likely. But you can go out currently and just get some quotes to see where that cost estimate would be. Now, if you have materials that are being donated by someone, so say someone wants to donate a piece of play equipment to you, that would be only on the sponsor side. But your sponsor side could also be some of the cash needed in order to purchase those materials and stuff from the bid. When you're talking about your planning, engineering, and environmental review section, I want to remind everyone that this total cost of this entire line cannot be any more than 10% of the total project cost. So if your cost is $100,000 for your total project, $10,000 of it can only appear in the planning, engineering, and environmental review section. So if costs are incurred up to our pre-award, they are going to be on the match side, okay? Some of them can be reimbursed by the grant, but we have to get approval from the National Park Service first. So if you're planning on using any pre-award, it's safest just to put that in your match side, okay? For land, easement, and acquisition, LWCF can reimburse up to 50% of the cost of the land as a grant. If it's being donated to you, then that entire value would then fall on the match side. Okay. If you're using equipment, okay, equipment can only be in-house equipment use can only be on the grant side or can only be on the match side. And you would be using the FEMA schedule of rates. Now, if you have to rent equipment because you do not have the in-house equipment or you need another piece of equipment, that rental fee can be reimbursed. So in the space provided in question 75, project sponsors should list detailed cost estimates for each of the cost categories included in the budget table. If you look at this example, this is ideally how we would like to see this question completed. Each cost category from question 72 is represented separately and totaled in the first line. Under the total, there is a separate itemized list of costs broken down accordingly. For example, my labor is broken down by the number of hours times the rate of pay. Materials are broken down by cost per unit. Take the time to double check your estimates in this table and make sure they match what is provided in question 72. So another thing is if you're not using a cost category in the budget table on 72, you don't need to include it here. So if you're not acquiring land, that can be left out. If you have no planning, engineering, or environmental, you don't have to include that on the table, just the cost categories that are listed on the table. Once again, do not specify any vendors or brand names in your estimates. If awarded, you will be required to follow the competitive bidding process. I also want to let you know that in previous grant rounds, we have had about 50% of our recipients were required to complete cultural resource surveys. So you might want to consider adding this cost into your planning, engineering, and environmental review section. That way, just in case you have to do that, you will already have it in your budget. Most of those cost anywhere from $3,000 to $5,000. Okay. All grant funds and matching shares should be included in this budget narrative. So even if it's your match, you're going to list it here. The narrative might be easier to fill out first and then transfer the totals to your table. Okay. So I like to fill this out first and then get my totals, make sure I have everything done right, and then transfer it over. Because you want to make sure that the totals here match what you're showing on the table and vice versa. You want to make sure. So just a quick reminder that points are easily lost in this section when the table and the narrative do not balance to each other. So if when I total up here, I don't get the same numbers on your table, there are points deducted in this section for that. Also, you want to make sure that everything that you listed in your scope of work is listed here and vice versa. So let's say I see in the budget narrative, you talk about trash cans and benches, but in your scope of work, you never mention trash cans and you never mention benches or trash cans, then you're not getting everything into your budget. Okay, so make sure everything mentioned in each section is in each of these two. If you are going to be using an engineering cost estimate, I recommend that you retype it and put it in this space unless it's way too long to fit. So if your budget estimate is 2 to 4 pages long, it may not fit all on here, but if you can condense it and get it down into more precision here, like say playground equipment, you could give a grand total instead of breaking down and then also include the cost estimate with it. Okay. So we really want you to try and fill out this budget narrative question and not just leave it blank. So enacted in 1970, the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA for short, is a federal law that requires federal agencies to assess the environmental efforts of their proposed action prior to making a decision to undertake that action. For the Land and Water Conservation Fund, federal NEPA approval is required because these are federal grant funds coming from the Department of Interior. NEPA is also considered an umbrella law because it encompasses requirements that are included in a variety of other federal environmental laws. The purpose of the Environmental Resource Survey section of this application is for you to provide documentation on the impact that your project will have on the environment. This is a list of different types of resources that are evaluated during the NEPA process. So you're going to be looking at the historic and archaeological and cultural resources. You're going to be looking at threatened and endangered species. You're going to look at judicial waters, which include lakes, streams, wetlands. It even includes disappearing streams that aren't always there. You're going to look at the water quality, floodplains, air quality, hazardous waste, prime and unique farmland, low income and minority populations, the noise levels, the recreation or user access, travel patterns, how are you affecting them, assurances of public and tribal involvement, and several others. A qualified specialist should be used to determine the impact of these resources that your project is going to have on these resources. And just to let everyone know, the tribal consultation is actually completed by the National Park Service, so you do not need to reach out to the tribes as part of this NEPA process. The national parks will do that. Most of our LWCF projects are category exclusions, or CEs, meaning that they are excluded from any further review. The answers you provide in the application will help us make our recommendation to the National Park Service, and the National Park Service will make the final determination based on what you provide in this application and their list of approved category exclusions, or their approved list of actions that, based on prior experience with similar actions, do not significantly impact on the environment. So the National Park Service will make the final determination. You, as the project sponsors, are just starting the process towards trying to receive a category exclusion. Question 76 through 85 comprises the environmental resource section of the grant application. The table provided in this section serves as a record of the environmental resources present at the site, whether the proposed action is likely to have a significantly negative impact on these resources, or whether further information is needed to determine the potential impact. Review the list of resources and identify any resources that may be significantly impacted by the actions of the project. Do not include short-term impacts as negative unless a federal permit is required to satisfy those impacts. The environmental resource survey should be completed with professional input from resource experts and in consultation with relevant local, state, and federal governments as appropriate. Remember that the costs associated with hiring a firm or individual to complete your environmental review can be used as a pre-award cost. Just make sure to add it to the budget table, the narrative, and question 74. So question 76 is table 1. For each resource, indicate if a positive impact or negative impact are anticipated to result from the action, or if further information is needed to determine the potential impact, so an unknown impact. If this project will have no effect on the resource, mark it as positive. If the resource is not located within the area, so an example would be underwater, the coastal burial resources or coastal zones, you can leave it blank. You don't need to mark it if that is not within your project area. One big change this year is that you will need to write a justification on how you made the determination of a positive, negative, or unknown impact for each resource. If you choose unknown impact, explain to us what other research needs to be done in order to make a determination of that resource. On pages 34 through 37 of the application guide, there are several links for environmental review maps and websites that will help you with each environmental resource. All maps and correspondence with other agencies should be included with your supporting documentation. Okay. Question 77 is table 2. This is a list of mandatory impact criteria that preclude the use of a category exclusion. So if you answer yes or a question mark to any of these criteria listed here, the 1 through 12, you must have an environmental assessment or an environmental impact statement done for your project, irregardless of how you answered in question 1. So I want to make it very clear here is if at any time you check yes or question mark here, you will be required, you will not receive a category exclusion, and you will be required to complete an EA or the environmental impact statement during this environmental review. Question 78 asks if there are any prior environmental reviews completed on this specific project or this site pursuant to the National Environmental Policy Act. So if there has been, please include a copy of the title page and a summarized finding from the NEPA document, and include page number references to where the findings are located within the document. You can include the entire document if you like, but they definitely want you to make sure that you're telling us exactly where you're finding your information. The purpose of this whole entire question is to prevent us from reinventing the wheel and requesting survey work or other research that may have already been included. So if your park, let's say you received an LWCF grant 3 years ago for phase 1 and now you're doing phase 2, if that has already had all this work done, you can include that NEPA review for this project. If the sites were all the same, if you did the whole park and stuff. So question 79 asks you to provide an example of any negative or unknown impacts identified in table 1 of the environmental resource survey, or any boxes marked yes in table 2. You would want to be specific here. Include the mitigation measures that are required from federal and state agencies to protect the resources within the project area. So if you were removing trees as part of your project, you could have an effect on the bats if you had federally protected bats in your area. And basically you would want to write here that you do plan on removing trees, but that you plan to remove them between November and March so that you would not have an impact on the endangered bats. So, and if you are removing trees, you are going to have to contact the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services to get their concurrence that you will not be endangering the bats. In question 8 asks you how the information identified in the tables was derived and what resources of data were used to justify the impact. So explain how you arrived at your answers to the question. So you want to list the maps and the websites that you use. And then 2, an example would be is if you sent a letter to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers asking about jurisdictional waters that you discovered in your project area from the IPAC report, we would want all those maps would need to be included, plus the correspondence from the Army Corps of Engineers. So the floodplain map you will need in order to use it to answer some of these questions as well. But since you have already printed it for 18, you do not need to include it in here twice, just include it in here once. Okay, so just make sure you're listing all your websites and all your course and who you wrote to. So other environmental maps that you should include in your stuff would be the wetland mapper, the hazardous substance map, the NRCS map that identifies the presence or lack thereof of unique and prime farmland, your species reports such as your IPAC and your Missouri Heritage. You're going to be including your SHPO packet and the letters you received in them, all your U.S. Census data that you collected in order to answer the questions. Those are all things, resources that you're going to list here. So question 81 asks you to list who contributed to filling out the environmental resource survey. Please provide the name, title, and agency for all individuals contributing to filling out the Environmental Resource Survey. So if you are the one from your organization that is filling out this report and you are collecting all the maps and you are doing all that, your name, number, title, and why, how, and your qualifications would be listed here. Okay. If you don't have someone on staff that can provide this expertise, or you do not feel you have that expertise, we do suggest that you contact your regional planning commission, as they usually have someone who is qualified to complete the NEPA assessment, or there are firms out there who can do the environmental review for you as well. Remember, this is a qualified pre-award expense that you can include in your application if you have to hire someone to do this. Question 82 asks you to provide a list of all federal, state, and local permits, approvals needed for the proposal, and explain their purpose and statute. So on page 38 of the application guide are the links for some of the more common permits that might be required for your projects. It is not an all-inclusive list, so please make sure you are doing your homework and you do your due diligence and make sure you know which permits you need. So one of the examples is, are you going to need a land disturbance permit? So if you plan to disturb more than 1 acre of land during this project, you will need to be in contact with DNR about a land disturbance permit. You know, did you have to, do you have wetlands? Or are you in a floodplain? Did you contact the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and they told you had to get a 404 permit? That all needs to be put here. What permits you need, which ones you already have in hand, and if you are currently filing for those permits, when you expect to receive those permits should all be listed here. Question 84 asks if there have been any previous cultural or historic resource surveys completed that included this site within the area of potential effect. If no, if you answer no here, then you need to describe any construction planned as a result of this project that will extend beyond the pre-existing disturbance area. So you would include the service depth. So we want you to think like an archaeologist. Is the area already disturbed? How deep will you be digging? Will you be using heavy equipment? Will there be borrow? And if so, where's it coming from? So here's an example. If you have a playground with mulch sitting on the ground currently, and you are replacing the mulch with pour and play, you will be going beyond the current disturbed area. So you would want to put in here that you will be replacing the mulch with pour and play. List how deep the pour and play will be dug into the ground and how deep the footing of the play equipment will be. If you've already had a cultural resource survey done, attach that to the survey, summarize the finding, include the page numbers for reference. As part of the environmental review process, you will need to initiate a Section 106 review with the State Historic Preservation Office, or SHPO for short. Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act requires federal agencies to consider the effects of historic properties present in the projects they carry out, approve, or fund. The State Historic Preservation Office, SHPO, is the agency authorized for ensuring Section 106 compliance. To initiate a Section 106 review, submit a Section 106 project information form to SHPO, and you have to mail those in. Instructions for completing and submitting the form are found on their website, which here is a link to their website. It is also located within the application guide. You will also be required to submit topographic maps of the site, project plans, which should include the project area size, the depth you will be digging into the soil, whether you're getting borrow or not, and photos of the existing structures. Upon receipt of this information, the SHPO has 30 days by law to review it and send you comments. Once you have your scope of work nailed down, you should start this project. It will take 30 days to receive a response back from SHPO after they receive your package in the mail. So let me stress this again. If the SHPO determination letter is not in the application packet, the application cannot be scored. So your SHPO packet should be done early. Get it to them. Do not wait until the end of October to submit the form to them, because at that point it will be too late. The letter from SHPO is a required document that you need to include with your supporting documentation. Without it, you will not be scored. If the information you provide is significant to make a determination, the SHPO will send a letter with the determination to you. And that's the letter you need to include to us. Not only do you need to include that letter, but you should give us also the SHPO, the packet that you sent to SHPO. We want a copy of that as well. Because what we have to make sure is that what you told SHPO is what is in your scope of work. Okay? So if you didn't tell SHPO that you were going to do something, you may have to go back and amend it. So please start this process early and make sure your scope of work is exactly how you're going to apply for it. If the information submitted is not significant to make a determination, SHPO will send you a letter requesting additional information, or they could require a professional archaeologist or architectural historian conduct a cultural or archaeological survey. Coordinate with SHPO on the requirements of the survey and completing a Section 106 survey memo form. Once the survey has been completed and reviewed by SHPO, indicate the determination results from the survey and attach the concurrence letter from SHPO and a copy of the survey to your supporting documents. If your project has an adverse determination, further consultation with SHPO, your organization, the grants management section staff with Missouri State Parks and the National Parks is required, and we will contact you to discuss it if you make that into round 2. Okay? So, very important. This is a 30-day process, so start it early, but make sure your scope of work is correct before you send it into them. Okay? And make sure you include all the information that they need the first time. So now I'm going to give you some examples of the maps and the reports you will need in order to finish table 1 and 2. These are the maps as we should see them in our supporting documents as well. So websites and directions on how to access these maps and reports are found on page 34 through 7 of the application guide. So our first map here is the hazardous waste map. As you will notice, I have put a square around the project area that I will be affecting. Nothing will be outside of this boundary area. You also want to make sure on this website that you click all the boxes that are there, and then you'll notice that it will populate if there are any of these resources within your boundary. You will notice that there is a red diamond there, but that red diamond is not within my park, nor is it within my area of effect, so I do not need to be concerned about that. But if it was within my park or within my project area, you would click on that, and then it will tell you what the information is about that site, and it would, and then you would include that with your supporting documentation. Okay, we want to make sure that you print all of these in color. Okay, And so with the hazardous waste map, one thing is they do not have a print button. So you will need to snip or print your screen in order to get this information. Okay. Next, these are several of the pages of your IPAC report. Please note that you don't see any watermarks going through this report. If your report has watermarks on it, then you did not print the official species report and you will need to go back in and get it. This report, so this is a several page report. This is only like 2 pages out of the like 6 or 8 page document. But this report gives you your threatened endangered species, your wetlands and stuff. So based on this report, you might need to contact the U.S. Fish and Wildlife or the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. If you are removing trees from this project, there's a sample letter to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service on page 18 of the application guide that you will need to send. You will also need to make a commitment not to remove trees except from between November and March when the bats are hibernating. And I can guarantee you that everyone who runs your report, you're going to have at least 2 to 3 of these bats in the state of Missouri. But there could be, you could have the flowering, there are insects, there are quite a few things. Our next one is the second report that you would get, which is the Missouri Heritage Report. This is showing, so the first over on the left-hand side shows the first page, and this is generally like a 3 to 5 page. If your report is a level 2 or 3, like this one says, you will need to follow the directions within the report and contact the Department of Conservation for further coordination with them. If it's a level 3, it's going to look like this and it's going to be yellow like that. And then there are directions on there on who you need to contact and what you guys would need to discuss. And all those contacts, all those emails you send need to go in with your supporting documentation. Next here we have our wetland mapper. If you have wetlands within your project, you're going to have to contact the U.S. Corps of Engineers to see if you're going to need a permit. So once again, here you kind of see my project area. I now have a stream and I have a freshwater intimate wetland in my project area. So I would be contacting the Corps to see what I would need to do, and I would tell them what I'm doing in my project area and if I'm actually going to be touching the stream or how I'm going to make sure that there's no runoff going into the stream, and then include that all within your supporting documentation. Next is our farmland map. This is probably the hardest one to get. This is a 5-page, generally a 5-page report. The first page is the project area, and this is what it's going to look like, and it might be multiple colors in there, but this is generally what you're going to look like. And then the next 2 to 4 pages are going to be the legend for the map that you get, and then the 5th one is the farmland classification. Page 5 is the classifications that are within this. There are directions on how to get these maps. This is probably the hardest, most challenging one to get. So if yours doesn't look similar to this, you haven't gone far enough and you didn't print the actual right map. So this is where that expert that you hire should be able to know how to get these maps that are required. Once again, please make sure that you're giving us these maps in color. Okay. And last but not least, we finally have our supporting document checklist. The supporting document checklist is provided on the application as an aid to project sponsors and should be completed before submitting the application packet. The supporting documents are required documentation to support your application and must be included in your application packet. For a detailed summary of each required item on this list, go to the instructions in the grant application guide, page 9 and 10. In order for your application to be complete, you need to provide all the information listed in this checklist unless it says if applicable. and in which case it is up to you to determine if it applies to you or not. For example, school community agreement is a requirement for schools that are applying, so they would provide that, but a city could say it's not applicable and would not have to provide it. The instructions also include template language for several of the items on this checklist. The Missouri State E-Verify is included on 12 through 15. You need to fill this out and return it with your application packet. The Missouri State E-Verify is the only document that can be handwritten on in order to, if you're filling it out. If you have to fill it out by hand, that is fine, but nothing else can be handwritten in this application. Remember that an incomplete or a totally handwritten application will not be scored. So if all you provide to me is, say, the map, the resolution, the financial assurance letter, and one of your E-Verifies, and nothing else on this list, there is not enough information. You have not provided enough information, therefore your application will not be scored, and it will be ineligible. Okay. The next section is the certification of responsible person, and this is the signature section. A responsible officer of the sponsor's agency, this is the individual that has been named in the resolution, must sign and date this section to complete the application, or the application will not be scored. Examples of responsible officials include mayors, city managers or administrator, park and rec department directors, and the chief financial officer. The responsible official does not need to be the contact person listed on the application, but does need to read the application and have an understanding of requirements for administering the grant, should one be awarded. The responsible official cannot be an independent grant writer who is not affiliated with the agency. An incomplete or inaccurate application packet will not be eligible for scoring. If this application is not signed, it cannot be scored. So please make sure you have a signature on this page. So a couple other things that we want to discuss is the boundary map. In your application guide on page 19, you will find the checklist on this slide. It is designed to help you make sure that your map includes the information we are looking for on the LWCF boundary map. Please be sure to include everything. Take the time to create a good quality map. This map is very important because it will become part of the federal record that designates your park, and it protects it in perpetuity for outdoor recreational use. I want to make sure that this is clear because sometimes people think that what is protected is only what the LWCF grant paid for. So for example, if the grant purchases playground equipment within a 20-acre park, the entire 20-acre park is what would be designated as the LWCF protected public outdoor recreation site, just not the play equipment. Projects that are funded are required to record the declaration of public outdoor recreation to the deeds or deeds associated with the project included within the boundary of the map. So your map should be of the entire park, which will include parking. Okay, so you want to make sure that you have your entire park is included. Don't just give me this small little area where the project is being affected. It's the entire park, whether the park is an acre or whether the park is 200 acres. The entire park should be within the boundary. And if you have a very large park, your map may be very small in order to get everything on the one map. So in addition to the checklist, the application guide includes an example map. Each required element has a numeric label for your reference that illustrates what's on the checklist. So you don't need to include these numbers on your map, okay? This is just so you can show what we're actually talking about. Your map will need a title. and that should say this is the LWCF boundary map, include the name of the park. You have to have a north arrow, a signature line, and the date when your authorized representative signed the map. So number 5 is the date that the map was prepared, and number 6 is asking you to delineate the property boundary with feet and subtract any square footage of anything that is not logically excluded from the boundary, like a community building or a school building. So basically, the buildings that you listed in question 33 of the application, you'll make sure that they are clearly marked on the map, and then that acreage is subtracted. Indicate any utility or underground easements and overhead lines and delineate those on the map. So you want to make sure you're showing that on the map. Under the signature block, put the latitude and longitude using the decimal degrees, which is going to match what you put up in your application on question 15. And so your total acreage is also going to go on here, and that should match what's in question 15 as well. Okay. Make sure that you follow the steps step by step when you create your map. Feel free to contact us if you've got any questions about how to do a good map. We are happy to look at your drafts of your LWCF boundary maps during your courtesy review, so please feel free to send them in. Where our example is in black and white, we do ask that you please use a colored map, whether your map is pulled off your parcel viewer or your GIS or from Google. We do prefer that you have a good colored map, okay? And you also want to make sure you're including the streets that are around it. That way someone is able to locate the map, located on a bigger map, okay? Here are some examples of some LWCF maps that have been given to us in the past. Note that we used to call it a Section 6F3 boundary map. Now we call it LWCF. So these are older maps, but these are good examples. So this is the Jeff City map. It's their Frog Hollow Greenway. If you notice that they have outlined their boundary map in the yellow, they have marked their bridge and stuff on there. They have their dimensions, they have the parcel number, they have how many acres it is, they have their water line easement designated there as well. They've signed it, they have a scale, and stuff like that. So this is a very nice colored map. Unfortunately, this map did not do as well when I had to photocopy it onto here, but this shows, even though it's dark, it has the trail on there. It tells us how many acres. It tells us where the access point is. It clearly identifies the boundary of the park. And this is out of Columbia. This is one of their parks in Columbia. Our last map here, just want to show you that this is actually a map that was done by a professional land surveyor for the Grant City Golf Course. And they had to have it surveyed because they weren't quite sure where the boundaries were. So they had the surveyor develop their map for them. So those are all really good examples of the maps. So we have now come to the end of our presentation. Once again, my name is Patty Reed, and my telephone number is up there. And then Rebecca Ross is also here. If I'm unavailable to help you, she can help you with stuff. We want to remind you that your final applications are due to us on November 16th, 2022. If you do have any questions, feel free to call me, or you can send any emails that you have to the mspgrants@dnr.mo.great. Thank you for listening to the presentation today.